Up until a few years, most exhibitions held in the National Archives of the Netherlands lasted 3 to 4 months. The degree of damage that would occur by showing the originals during this period was considered acceptable for most objects. However, this policy changed when the National Archives chose for exhibitions with a longer duration, from 6 months up to several years. There are various reasons for this policy change, but the main reasons are inspired by efficiency. A longer duration means less exhibition concepts and stories to develop, which also leads to less preparation time of objects in the conservation studio, less waste of materials, and overall fewer time spent on exhibition design and construction. Simultaneously, having more time to exploit the exhibition concept for different purposes. However, when objects are chosen for such long exhibitions, one can assume that this will lead to more deterioration, perhaps even more than is acceptable. Therefore, the most important question is how to align the wish to show the objects in a satisfying way with the optimal preservation of these objects. The result is that those involved in exhibitions have to reconsider their professional attitude. In this talk, we explain which steps are taken at the National Archives to accomplish this, and we will contemplate why these steps are accepted nowadays, while some of them were not before. Conservators and exhibition makers are often advocates for opposing causes. Conservators prefer objects safely stored, while exhibition makers rather see objects shown. Polarization soon arises when discussing whether an object can be exposed for such a long time. For the exhibition maker, compiling an exhibition is a creative process, based on and making use of stories found in archival objects. To them, using the original is often key. Hence, the public wants the real thing. The conservator, however, is often emotionally involved with the object. They are the advocates for the objects and feel responsible for their well-being. Thus, they aim to protect the object from degradation and basically every kind of use. Doing otherwise would be almost against their nature. When deciding whether to exhibit an original, several outcomes are possible. This can make achieving a satisfying result for both parties a challenging exercise. If a conservator denies the use of an object as they feel it will be harmful because of its condition of vulnerability, the exhibition maker will be unhappy. The exhibition cannot go on as planned. But if a fragile object is shown unconditionally, it will suffer, and with it, the conservator. To reach an outcome that is more satisfying for both the exhibition maker and the conservator, there are several options. If the conservator finds an object too fragile, they can suggest to replace it by a similar object that is less prone to deterioration. Another option is to change the object or page midway the exhibition, so exposure time is limited. Or one might choose to show a less sensitive part of an object. For instance, not showing the fragile inside of the object, but the more sturdy outside. Options like these make it possible to tell the story, sometimes by minute adjustments and sparing the object at the same time, at least to some extent. These options all focus on the object and how to deal with its vulnerability. At the National Archives, we have, apart from this, explored some other approaches, which we will discuss next. Establishing and implementing policies that are accepted by all involved. Optimization of the exhibition area, or using a facsimile. Whenever an object is requested for exhibition in the National Archives or elsewhere, a conservator will write an advisory report. For this, the object is critically observed. The object's condition, whether it's possible to digitize it with or without preparation, the location of the exhibition, the light sensitivity of the object, the expected time needed for restoration and preparation for exhibition, and how the object should be presented are all noted. Based on this report, the conservator gives an advice whether to say yes or no to the request, based on objective grounds and well-motivated arguments. In most cases, the conclusion will be yes to the request. The occasional no is accepted because everybody involved is aware of the process that led to this no. Only when there are other, often diplomatic, reasons to choose for a yes instead of the advised no, the conservator's advice might be overruled. The lighting policy is a very important part of our advice procedure. Based on existing research and the principle of just noticeable change, we established categories of high and low light-sensitive documents and maximum periods these documents may be exhibited. Starting point is that an object is allowed to undergo one so-called just noticeable change in 10 years. 10 just noticeable changes are supposed to discolor the object in such a way that it has no aesthetic value anymore. An object that is exposed for the maximum amount of time every 10 years will be useless for exhibition purposes in 100 years. Per object, we calculate the amount of lux which is still allowed within the 10-year period, taking into account the exhibition history of that specific object. The expected amount of lux on the object may influence the allowed exhibition period. The less lux or the shorter the object is exposed to light, the longer the object can be on display. Adjusting the entire exhibition area in a way that the circumstances are such that degradation should be minimal is another very effective approach. This way, it affects all documents exhibited, not only the superfragile ones. A good example of this is the way the Act of Abjuration of 1581 is on permanent display in a freely accessible part of the National Archives. Previously, this was done as seen on the left. Since January 2021, the display is incorporated in a completely new exhibition area made especially for long exhibitions, together with other documents. The documents will stay in this display area for at least 1 year. To make sure that the amount of lux each object receives is kept to an absolute minimum, the exhibition area is always dark, unless a visitor walks in. Furthermore, the showcase is part of the repository's HVAC system, which means that the settings for relative humidity and temperature are the same as the repositories, thus cooler and drier than the regular circumstances for an exhibition area. Apart from adjusting the exhibition area, focusing on the story one wants to convey and examining the role an object should play in this story is another approach. A good example of this is the story of Tula, in which the voice of Tula, who liberated himself and led the Curaçao slave revolt of 1795, is recorded by a priest first-handed. Because of the importance and uniqueness of this source, the idea arose to make the book containing Tula's story part of a 5-year educational exhibition. However, the manuscript was in no condition to be exposed, let alone for 5 years. The binding was unsound and the text block suffered from severe iron gall corrosion, resulting in extreme brittle paper, tears, and lacunas. Nonetheless, the decision was still made to show it for the full 5 years. The importance of the contents, Tula's story, outweighed the physical well-being of the carrier, the book. That this could happen is primarily due to miscommunication, insufficient consultation, and inflexibility to think in alternative solutions by those involved. By then, the tide turned, which led to reconsidering the semi-permanent exhibition of the story of Tula. This made it possible to come up with a strategy to ensure that this unique document would be preserved as well as possible, while at the same time the story could be shared with the world. First, A detailed condition assessment was done. This alone helped. Seeing that the original is in such a deplorable condition made it clear to even the exhibition makers that this is not wise to exhibit the book like this for years to come. Second, the entire manuscript was digitized with the utmost care under the supervision of a conservator. The purpose of this was twofold. The contents of the book would be accessible via a digital copy, and a digital copy could serve as the basis for making a facsimile. Third, the entire manuscript was conserved. Although the pages containing the story of Tula were stabilized previously, the rest of the book, the context, was not. It should be stressed that conservation by no means implies that the manuscript will not be fragile afterwards. The book is still at risk of being severely damaged again when one leaves through the pages. Parallel to conservation, two types of facsimiles were made. The first type has a look and feel of the original, but everybody can see the text block is a copy from the original, not the real thing. One can leaf through this book without worrying about damaging anything. The second type of facsimile contains only the 5 pages of the story of Tula. These pages are almost a perfect replica of the original. So in this type of facsimile, the focus is only on the contents, not on the context, the book in which the story can be found. Finally, an advice was written for the use of the manuscript, which explains why the original is now excluded from use in most cases, and also which alternatives are at hand, and under which exceptional circumstances the original may still be used. This document is acknowledged by management and is a clear reference of how to act in future cases. This example of the story of Tula shows that facsimiles can make an object and the story it contains more accessible. Not only because there are fewer restrictions on use, one does not have to worry so much about incorrect climate, lighting conditions, or handling, but also because multiple copies can be made for different purposes. In other words, the use of facsimiles does not have to be limiting. On the contrary, it can be a valuable tool to help tell the story. This flowchart represents the different options that can be taken into account when discussing exhibition possibilities. Options are not limited to whether or not the object can be exhibited, but also include looking at the immediate surroundings of an object and the duration of display. Of course, combinations of options are also possible. For instance, a shorter exhibition time of the original and for the remainder of the exhibition a facsimile. The end result is that it's often possible to let the object tell a story without damaging it in the process. We hope we were able to show that things have changed at the National Archives. On the one hand, conservators had to let go of their gut feelings and make sure they provide rational arguments. On the other hand, exhibition makers have become more aware of the unique qualities and vulnerabilities of physical objects, making them more inclined to consider alternative approaches. So what led to this change? Most important is that all involved communicate with each other about wishes, options, possibilities, and impossibilities. But the change is also part of a broader development in the way people think about objects and the story they tell. Exhibitions tend to be more about letting people experience a story. Showing originals still is very much a part of this, but the possibility of using other resources, such as facsimiles, seems to be more widely accepted nowadays. With communication as our key objective, we achieve collaboration in a very early stage of exhibition preparations. Maintain continuous interaction between all parties involved, and have an appreciation for the flexibility and creativity on either side for trying to find solutions instead of arguing who has the bigger interest. This way, the stories hidden in the National Archives can be shared with all, using the real thing or not. Thank you for your attention.